Inside America's maximum security prisons, the dark reality of the most dangerous inmates. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of the justice system, where silence is louder than screams and steel doors decide a man's fate, subscribe now, because tonight, we're stepping inside a place few ever see, and even fewer survive unchanged. The desert outside Florence, Colorado, looks endless and empty. Wind scrapes across dry earth, rattling against fences crowned with razor wire. But behind layers of reinforced concrete and electronically sealed doors stands the most secure prison in the United States, ADX Florence, the so-called Alcatraz of the Rockies. On October 22, 2001, smoke filled the sky in Florence. Correctional officers rushed down sterile corridors as alarms screamed through the Supermax unit. Inside a recreation yard no larger than a kennel, 2 inmates had been left alone for just minutes. It was a controlled setting designed to prevent violence. Every movement monitored. Every second calculated. And yet, something had gone terribly wrong. When officers reached the scene, inmate Robert Bobby Hood lay bleeding from multiple stab wounds. The weapon wasn't a knife smuggled from outside, it was a makeshift blade fashioned from prison materials. Carefully crafted. Patiently hidden. Waiting for the right moment. The man standing over him was Clayton Fountain. Fountain wasn't new to violence. Years earlier he had been part of a white supremacist prison gang known as the Aryan Brotherhood. In 1983 at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, Fountain and other gang members had murdered 2 federal correctional officers in separate incidents on the same day, a shocking act that forced the Bureau of Prisons to permanently tighten control measures nationwide. The prison system changed because of men like him. After Marion, Fountain was transferred to ADX Florence when it opened in 1994, a facility designed specifically for inmates considered too dangerous for any other prison in America. Each cell at ADX is a concrete box, 7 feet by 12 feet. A narrow slit window angled upward so inmates can see only sky. A bed, a desk, a toilet, all poured from solid cement. Human contact reduced to a voice through a door slot. 23 hours a day alone. But isolation does not erase violence. It can sharpen it. On that October day in 2001, Fountain had been given rare contact with another inmate, Robert Hood, also linked to the Aryan Brotherhood. Investigators would later learn tensions had been simmering inside the gang. Leadership disputes. Suspicions of betrayal. In prison politics, perceived weakness is fatal. Surveillance footage showed no warning. Just a sudden eruption of motion. Officers responded within minutes, but the damage was done. Hood died from his injuries, becoming one of the very few homicide victims inside ADX Florence, a prison built to prevent exactly this kind of act. The murder shook the Bureau of Prisons. If violence could happen here, where could it not? As investigators combed through Fountain's history, they uncovered a trail of calculated brutality stretching back decades. Yet what disturbed them most wasn't rage. It was patience. Every move had been deliberate. Every escalation purposeful. Inside Supermax, communication is restricted but not impossible. Inmates pass coded messages through legal mail, shouted exchanges through vents, subtle signals during transport. Alliances shift in silence. Orders travel without paper trails. Fountain was aging. His power within the gang was fading. And according to intelligence reports, he believed Hood had challenged his authority. Was this murder an act of revenge? A desperate attempt to prove he still commanded fear? Or something more strategic, a message sent to others watching from their concrete cells? The FBI joined the investigation, interviewing inmates who rarely spoke. Some denied everything. Others hinted at internal conflict. One whispered that Hood had broken the rules. But which rules? In Supermax, the rules aren't written in the handbook. As the case unfolded, prosecutors realized this wasn't just another prison homicide. It was evidence that even the most restrictive institution in America couldn't fully contain organized prison gangs. And then investigators uncovered something chilling. Intercepted correspondence suggesting the conflict inside ADX wasn't isolated. It was connected to gang directives outside the prison walls. The violence in that small concrete yard may have been only one move in a much larger game. Because when they finally decoded one of Fountain's confiscated messages, they discovered a name, someone on the outside. And that name would reveal that the reach of America's most dangerous inmates extended far beyond their locked steel doors. The name pulled from Clayton Fountain's intercepted message did not belong to another inmate. It belonged to a man living free in Texas, a known Aryan Brotherhood associate who had never set foot inside ADX Florence, yet whose fingerprints were metaphorically all over the conflict brewing within its walls. For federal investigators, this changed everything. ADX was designed to isolate the most dangerous criminals in America: terrorists, cartel leaders, organized crime bosses, and prison gang commanders. The assumption was simple: lock them in concrete boxes, sever communication, and their influence dies with distance. But the Bureau of Prisons and the FBI knew better. Influence doesn't need proximity. It needs loyalty. And loyalty inside the Aryan Brotherhood was enforced with fear. As agents dug deeper, they discovered that even from solitary confinement, senior gang members could issue orders using coded letters disguised as legal correspondence. Messages would pass through multiple hands: attorneys, girlfriends, distant relatives, none necessarily aware they were carrying instructions that could trigger violence. The name in Fountain's message belonged to a regional gang coordinator suspected of relaying directives between incarcerated leaders and members on the outside. If true, the murder of Robert Hood wasn't just a personal dispute. It may have been an execution sanctioned beyond prison walls. The stakes escalated. Federal prosecutors began building a racketeering case under RICO statutes, aiming to prove the Aryan Brotherhood operated as a criminal enterprise, inside and outside prison. They needed evidence that the murder at ADX was part of an organized structure, not an isolated act. Meanwhile, inside Florence, tension thickened. Inmates were locked down. Recreation schedules shifted. Intelligence officers monitored every scrap of communication. Even the smallest exchange between cells was treated like potential conspiracy. Clayton Fountain, already serving multiple life sentences, was placed under even stricter observation. But isolation didn't silence him. According to prison intelligence reports, coded phrases continued appearing in outgoing mail. References to old loyalty, settled accounts, future business. Each phrase sounded vague on its own. Together they formed a pattern. Investigators began interviewing former Aryan Brotherhood members who had turned informant. One described the gang's hierarchy in chilling detail: a three-man commission at the top, regional lieutenants on the outside, and foot soldiers both free and incarcerated. "Supermax doesn't stop rank," the informant said. "It just makes it harder to hear the orders." The FBI traced financial transactions linked to known associates. Small amounts of money transferred quietly. Legal defense funds, commissary deposits, payments that could reward loyalty or punish dissent. Then came the twist. A cooperating witness revealed that Robert Hood had been suspected of something far more dangerous than insubordination. He was rumored to be considering cooperation with federal authorities in a broader racketeering case. Inside a gang built on absolute silence, that suspicion alone was a death sentence. If Hood had been labeled a potential informant, even without proof, eliminating him would send a clear message: betrayal will not be tolerated no matter how thick the walls. But investigators faced a problem. There was no recorded order explicitly demanding Hood's death. No direct instruction. Only fragments of coded language and circumstantial ties. Prosecutors needed to prove that the murder inside America's most secure prison was orchestrated as part of a larger conspiracy. As the case unfolded, federal indictments began rolling out against Aryan Brotherhood leaders across multiple states. The government alleged decades of murders, drug trafficking, and racketeering carried out under a unified command structure. The murder at ADX became a centerpiece, evidence that even in total isolation, gang leadership could enforce discipline. But danger was still spreading. While agents were preparing charges, intelligence intercepted chatter about potential retaliation against suspected informants in other facilities. The murder of Hood wasn't the end. It was leverage. One investigator later described the realization as chilling. We weren't just dealing with inmates. We were dealing with an organization that adapts. And then something even more alarming surfaced. During a search of another high-security facility, authorities uncovered correspondence referencing a cleanup list, names of inmates across multiple prisons believed to be disloyal. Hood's name had been crossed out, meaning there were others. The murder inside that silent recreation yard was no longer just about power inside ADX Florence. It was part of a systematic purge. And as prosecutors prepared to bring the full weight of federal conspiracy charges against the Aryan Brotherhood leadership, one question loomed over the investigation. If men locked alone in concrete cells could still command violence across the country, how far did their control really reach? Because the next name on that list was still alive, and investigators feared time was running out. By the time federal prosecutors unveiled their sweeping indictment against senior Aryan Brotherhood leaders in 2002, The murder of Robert Hood inside ADX Florence had transformed from an isolated prison killing into a symbol of something far more disturbing: the endurance of organized power in total isolation. Court documents laid out a brutal narrative. For decades, the Aryan Brotherhood had allegedly operated as a tightly controlled criminal enterprise, ordering murders, drug trafficking, and intimidation campaigns both inside and outside prison walls. Even the most secure institutions in America had not broken their chain of command. Clayton Fountain was already serving multiple life sentences for the 1983 murders of 2 correctional officers at USP Marion. The killing of Robert Hood added another layer to a record soaked in violence. Prosecutors argued that Hood's death was not spontaneous rage but enforcement, discipline carried out to preserve authority and silence potential cooperation. The RICO case that followed targeted gang leaders across several states. Testimony from former members exposed the internal code: loyalty above all, silence above survival. Any whisper of cooperation with law enforcement could trigger deadly consequences. In court, the government painted ADX Florence not as a failure, but as a battleground. Even inside concrete cells with slit windows and 23-hour lockdowns, influence persisted through coded messages, intermediaries, and fear carefully maintained over decades. But then came an unexpected turn. As trials progressed, several high-ranking members struck plea deals. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of death sentences, they agreed to cooperate. The iron rule of silence began to fracture. Information poured out: details of murders ordered from within maximum security units, accounts of coded communication methods, descriptions of how gang leadership rotated when one figure weakened. For the first time, the myth of absolute control cracked publicly. Clayton Fountain himself never stood trial for Hood's murder in the traditional sense. Already serving life without parole, he remained locked in ADX until his death in 2021. Age and illness eventually did what prison walls could not: they ended his story. But the system he embodied did not disappear with him. Robert Hood's death remained a stark reminder of how prison gangs weaponize reputation. Investigators ultimately concluded that while direct written proof of an execution order was elusive, the killing aligned with long-standing Brotherhood practices of eliminating perceived informants. In the world of prison politics, suspicion alone can seal fate. Meanwhile, ADX Florence tightened its procedures further. Recreation protocols changed. Intelligence units expanded. Monitoring systems improved. Yet corrections experts admitted a difficult truth: total isolation can restrict movement, but it cannot instantly dismantle ideology or erase decades of criminal networks. The broader RICO prosecution significantly weakened the Aryan Brotherhood's centralized leadership. Multiple members received life sentences in federal court. The case disrupted their ability to operate openly. But law enforcement officials quietly acknowledged that prison gangs, like many criminal organizations, evolve rather than vanish. And that is the haunting reality of America's maximum security prisons. They are designed to contain the most dangerous individuals: terrorists, cartel bosses, gang commanders. Concrete walls, steel doors, surveillance cameras. Structures built on the belief that separation equals safety. But the murder of Robert Hood proved something unsettling. Power inside these walls does not always rely on physical freedom. It relies on fear, loyalty, and reputation, currencies that survive confinement. Today, ADX Florence still stands in the Colorado desert, silent and imposing. Inmates remain inside concrete cells with angled windows showing only the sky. Some will never leave alive. Visitors rarely glimpse what truly happens beyond the secured gates. There are no dramatic escapes. No chaotic riots broadcast to the public. Just quiet tension, calculated silence, and the understanding that the most dangerous battles are sometimes fought without a single word spoken. Robert Hood's name is not widely known outside criminal justice circles. His death didn't dominate national headlines for long. But inside federal prisons, the message traveled clearly: authority would be enforced, even in the nation's most secure facility. Investigators once believed Supermax was the final answer, the ultimate solution to uncontrollable violence. What they learned instead is far more complex. You can lock a man in a concrete box. You can limit his human contact. You can monitor every letter he writes. But if the network survives, the influence survives with it. And somewhere tonight, inside another silent cell in America's prison system, someone may still be waiting, watching, calculating. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe, because the truth behind locked doors is often darker than anyone wants to admit.